muncim noi din vremuri strămoșești, cuvânt de dor și luptă, de doine și povești. Dar dacă astăzi pacea e lege și scut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Cuvinte le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce înseamnă, ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin l-am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. холостяк, в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, реют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы. Будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, вы поверьте нам, отцы. Будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердце тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди.
Hello everybody and welcome to the slightly delayed stream due to, let's just call it fairly typical Scottish technical issues involving the internet turning to The speed of an old dial-up connection for a while there. I'm not quite sure what's going on with that. So, but thankfully, we are. I have that situation resolved, I think. So we are here with you live, talking about Andy Burnham and the Manchesterism fraud, the phony, non-existent working class credentials of a certain Mr. Graham Platner, which I wouldn't have bothered to cover at all, given that this is like just some dumb thing like American leftists are getting excited about. But unfortunately, there is a significant fraud going along here, and therefore I feel obliged to state certain truths. So we're going to be looking at that, and then coming back to old perfidious Albion, we're going to be looking at the remilitarisation gambit of the ruling class. And again, I've explained in detail why this is such a fraud, but I saw some. Well, there's been a new campaign basically waged in the press with Starmer fucking off, and then the with his defense improvement plan basically announced, and the all of the huge aggressive sounding rhetoric he was using, basically what it comes down to is not very much of anything at all. A lot of big announcements, a lot of big words, a lot of talk about, building British fighting capacity, building industrial capacity, modern 21st century army. We must be able to fight peer competitors. We will increase the size of the army by about 3,000. Which is what it basically comes down to, that and more drones, because they can't recruit an army, basically. And the more sensible of them know that. But that doesn't stop them babbling on in public and saying everything else needs to be cut to fund more so-called defense spending. We'll be coming to that later on. So we are going to be talking first about a certain Andrew Burnham, who is the prime minister in waiting. He is awaiting his destiny, so to speak. Now, I've talked about Andy Burnham before, and I'm going to do a deeper dive into his time as Manchester mayor at some point soon, because he's basing so much of his credentials on this that it's worth investigating it in more depth. But today I wanted to comment on two things, because he did this speech the other day where he was talking about how devolution is the answer, or part of the answer to the problems facing old perfidious Albion right now. And this was, of course, treated by his allies as some sort of solemn statement of new and profound wisdom that he'd come out with, rather than what it was, which is a restatement of 30-year-old policies of Tony Blair that they were trying to push in the 90s and the early 2000s. John Prescott, if anybody remembers him, was trying to push regional devolution in England 20 years ago, maybe longer. So this isn't anything new. What it is an attempt to essentially, as I've said before, revive the Labour Party by parachuting in Andy Burnham to try and unite its various disparate factions and keep the show on the road. He, unlike Keir Starmer, is a more effective bourgeois politician who knows he needs some kind of narrative. And as he's not going to talk about class very much, except in the vaguest terms, he's going to talk about regionalisms. And his idea is, we're going to devolve more power to the English regions. And this will enable English regions to do stuff like build more council housing, do stuff like take control over local transportation services, that kind of thing. The kind of thing that some of which he's done in Manchester. But the idea that the problem with Britain is that it's too centralized. Its government is too centralized, and that's why it has all these problems. This is quite frankly ludicrous. The reason why Britain is a deindustrialized parasite state with a completely parasitic economy and a completely corrupt state machine is not because there's insufficient devolution of power to Yorkshire or Merseyside or the northeast around Newcastle or Norfolk or Devon. That would not have changed the trajectory of deindustrialization and parasitism over the past 50 years. Now, Burnham says he wants to break with the economic policies of the last 40 years. Not quite sure how he's going to do that. Not quite sure how he proposes to give more powers to local government when the existing local government structures in places like Nottingham and Birmingham and many other major cities are either bankrupt and shredding jobs and services or on the edge of bankruptcy. So, how on earth is he going to get around that? He hasn't answered that question, nor do I think will he answer that question. Because then you have to ask certain questions about, well, why is it that so many councils are broke? And there are, of course, many reasons why numerous councils are broke. But a big part of the reason is that they have like ruinous debts that they have incurred over the years through PFI schemes, private finance initiative schemes, which have essentially mortgaged off public assets, and then the councils loan them back at ruinous rates from the private companies that supposedly built them, and at the state, at local level and national level, is designed to operate as a facilitator for the transfer of public money from the state to private industry, or private companies, I should say. Industry would imply that they did something. So that's part of the problem. The other problem is that, and he talked about that if we devolve power to the English regions, then we'll have like a partnership with the private sector, and there'll be more investment. Well, Britain has one of the lowest rates of investment, if not the lowest, in the whole G7. And by investment, I mean actually investment from the private sector into building new industries, building things that will actually employ people. Britain has an astonishingly low rate of investment, has done since at least the Great Recession of almost 20 years ago, 18 years ago now, in 2008. The private sector just does not invest in Britain, hasn't done for a very long time. All of the bailouts that were given, all of the money that was stuffed into the pockets of the banking system, all the way through 2008 to about 2016, 17, and then again during the COVID years in the form of more bailouts. Well, the banks and other businesses that got it just got all that money from the state and sat on it. It wasn't invested because the rate of profit, as we've explained before on this channel, is just too low for the private sector to invest. And in that sense, they are, to some degree, telling the truth. So it's a myth that this is down to insufficient devolution of powers or over centralization. Now, it's true that Britain is a very centralized state. Most of the powers are hoarded into Westminster. Local councils have been deliberately stripped of power for many decades. The centralization of power really is a symptom of the modern imperialist state. Now, to give you a couple of examples, it used to be the case many years ago, I'm talking over 100 years ago, that there used to be significant local control over things like policing. I've mentioned this before, but it's worth reiterating. So you used to have elected boards in this country consisting of councillors who would be responsible for holding the senior officers of any county police force to account, bringing them in, questioning them, etc. Used to be that a lot of control over the old county police forces in England, Wales, and Scotland. Scotland just has one national police force now. But it used to be county-wide forces that the local government would have a degree of control over them. It would control, have a degree of control over who the chief officer was. In English, in Britain, it's called chief constable. Now that was all done away with, or started to be done away with, after like the entire working class had won the vote, so in the later 1920s, because the ruling class and the state and their state didn't want the working class being able to influence policing in any way. They wanted that power reserved completely for themselves. So even though you still get county forces in Britain, in England and Wales, you most of the control over them is not exercised at a local level. It's exercised from London, and that's quite deliberate. And that's part of the process of imperialism playing out inside a country, because imperialism favors rapid decision making by a centralized state. Also, as soon as the working class won the vote, and as soon as the working class was able to actually elect, however useless they were, social democratic MPs, not just in Britain, but France, Germany. The United States is a little bit different, but the same lesson does apply. As soon as the working class gets the vote, the ruling class and the state bureaucracy look for ways to circumvent that. And the ways to circumvent it are the centralization of power in bureaucracies. Because every time it looks like there's going to be any kind of disruption to the things that imperialism needs to function properly, which is rapid decision making and deployment of funds, because under decaying imperialism, the state operates as a guarantor of profits, basically. And so that's what they need more than anything else. That steady, relentless stream of subsidies coming from the state to the supposed private sector. And if there's any debate over that, even in a bourgeois parliament, then that is considered unacceptable. So, for instance, if you think of, to use an American example, if you think of the initial vote on the bank bailout from 2008, where there was like a wave of protests from ordinary people in the United States to Congress, and in the initial bailout measure was voted down, then the ruling class used all of their resources to scream and threaten total collapse of everything unless they were given basically unlimited money and suffer no consequences from crashing their own system. And of course, the politicians duly obeyed. So, but they would prefer not to have to do that. They would prefer that the politicians didn't get a vote, because even if you've bought them, got blackmail material on them, or you've just stuffed the Parliament or the Congress or the Senate or the National Assembly or the Reichstag with compliant stooges, there's always a risk that their constituents might get angry enough to frighten them into doing something. And so they prefer things to be contained in bureaucracies. That, in essence, is why every imperialist country it becomes more and more centralized over time, which is why you get, in the United States case, more and more power being concentrated in the office of the president, and Congress essentially just becoming a useless rubber stamp. And because, again, the ruling class, the state bureaucracy, the people who matter in policy making don't want debates. Even in bourgeois parliaments, they don't want debates. They want as many things as possible to be shoved through a bureaucratic process where nobody can see it, and the bourgeois press dutifully ignore it. That's why there's an increasing amount of the defense budget in the United States which is declared secret. You can't see it, or a few senators can see it who are too rabidly fascistic or compromised to say anything about it. This is the system imperialism favors. So when you know that, and when you know that this is the system that emerged to serve imperialism, and Britain is a very old imperialist power in a very decaying state, how on earth, even if Andy Burnham was serious for 5 seconds, and let's just assume for a moment, let's give him the benefit of the doubt and assume that he is, how are you going to decentralize that? What powers are you going to devolve to get around that? There's nothing that devolving powers to already bankrupt local authorities or creating new bureaucratic structures over places which have already gone into a severe economic slide for decades now, where there's large-scale unemployment, large-scale poverty. Like, how on earth is devolving more powers going to deal with that? How are you going to get the private sector to do anything to invest in a place like Stoke, for instance? Like, how on earth are you going to like deal with long-term unemployment there? You can't. Not by devolving power, not by creating another mayoral system. It's all just like the same reheated Blairism from 25 years ago, because this was Blair's idea. Like, oh, we're going to bring government closer to the people. It's all this gimmicky bullshit. So it's all nonsense. And how on earth he's going to fund like a mass new program of council house building, which he did say he was going to do? How is he going to do that? How is he going to do that without bursting the property bubble and leaving like all the house price fanatics, shall we say, like screaming and protesting and probably go threatening to suicide bomb Parliament if house prices dip any further? How are you going to do that while keeping housing as a speculative asset, which is what it is at the moment and has been for decades? So how are you going to undo that? He's not going to. That promise will disappear. It will vanish. Because if you try and undo the asset bubbles that the British economy is actually based on, it's based on debt bubbles and asset bubbles domestically, and based on parasitism internationally, for extracting wealth from various transactions all the way around the world and funneling it back into the City of London. So that's the basis of the fucking British economy, not what goes on domestically. That's the less important side. So this is all dross and drivel. But unsurprisingly, the trade union leaders have bought it. Now, I'm going to do a more detailed analysis of Burnham's plans as time goes on, but I did want to just essentially just talk about the exorable, very annoying, very fucking transparent branding operation that he's doing, which is that what he's doing at the moment, he's doing this like I'm a cheeky northern monkey act, basically. I know. He says, this is Manchester. We do things differently here, which is a slogan off a fucking t-shirt, by the way. But I spent, how long was it? 20, overall, like the first like 20 years of my life growing up on the southern edge of Greater Manchester. I then came back and I worked there for 15 years. In central Manchester. I lived in various places around south and central Manchester, and I saw what became of the city over time. And what became of the city was exactly the same thing that happens to every other city in England, Scotland, Wales. Same thing happens in Ireland as well. North occupies 6 counties and the south, which is that every single city gets turned into a financial centre. So that's what Manchesterism, the Manchesterism he keeps babbling on about. That's his actual record, and it's the record of all the Manchester politicians and the Liverpool politicians and the Leeds politicians, which is create a city centre, a tiny island of like wealth based on financial services, law firms, and property speculation. If you look at the skyline of Manchester now, and from when I go and visit my family in northern Derbyshire, and you take the dog for a walk and you go up and look from the hills towards Manchester. Manchester now has about 10 to 20 like massive glass monstrosities in it that have like created a new skyline. Those are all been built by money from the Gulf states, largely money from like Hong Kong. Like they've been built as speculative assets by capital that came from outside of the country, and built in such a way as that they don't even have anybody in them a lot of the time. So these are like basically a lot of them have been built as money laundering opportunities. So like this is the city that has been created by Andy Burnham. It's not just him. There's a whole load of politicians to blame for this, but like the effect that it had in the 15 years that I lived there was devastating. Because when I came back from university to first work there and live there, which was 2007, there was still something of like the working class charm that the city did have, because a lot of the branding of this plastic little shit Andy Burnham engages in about, oh, this is Manchester, or we do things differently here, a lot of that came from actual working class culture of the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and to a little extent like the 90s, like the bands, the writers, the kind of culture that existed there. A lot of that came from the working class. But what's happened over the last 20 years or so is that as the city's been turned into a centre, basically a miniature version of London, again, based on finance firms, property speculation, law firms, other forms of parasitism have been encouraged to grow up there. There's been like a vast social cleansing where like the working class gets pushed further and further out of the city, and like the higher paid professional managerial types, or as some theorists have called them, the new petty bourgeoisie, take their place. And the entire city is geared towards them in the sense that all the places to drink in the city centre are mostly just massively overpriced, like plastic fucking wine bars and corporate chain pubs. In the sense that like to go out anywhere in the city centre, you'd need to fucking take out a loan from a loan shark to actually go to like any gigs that go on in the city centre. Again, it'd like cost you like half your week's wages or something if there's like two or three of you. To the football teams that they're always fucking going on about, like Man United and Man City. One of which, Man United, is owned by two sets of asset strippers, the Glazer family of American infamy, and Jim Ratcliffe, another asset stripper, who spends most of his time cruising around the Mediterranean on his fucking yacht, and whose time in ownership or as co-owner of the club has seen only more money leak out of Manchester United, and Manchester City are of course owned by the ruling family of the United Arab Emirates. And with both of them, the ticket prices have just gone up and up and up and up and up, and the working class fans increasingly priced out. So that now, if you go to like Old Trafford, you see there like many thousands of people come from far, far away, come from out in the Cheshire stockbroker belt. Or I used to live in a flat round the corner from Old Trafford. You would see many people coming in from like Japan, South Korea, flying in for the weekend for the game. The actual Mancunian working class fans would be watching the game in a pub around the corner, if they were lucky. So this whole thing is like it is a cannibalization of working class culture, which has been just repackaged into and repurposed into this sterile corporate product sold to finance scumbags, legal scumbags, property speculator scumbags, and like businessmen flying in for the weekend. That's what the city's built for. It trades off this reputation as being like this roguish, slightly dangerous place, a rebel city. It's fucking not. It hasn't been that for a long, long time. Same is true of Liverpool. Same is true of Leeds. Same is increasingly true of like Glasgow. Edinburgh, down the road from me, has been like turned into just a sterile tourist trap, with the locals just like pushed out of the city centre completely. That's what's being done to all of these places. And so for this plastic twat, Andy Burnham, to come along and act like he's, the fanfare of the common man, no, he has been the chosen representative of the capitalist class to wage their usual class war on the working class and dress it up in like quirky alternative colors, and it's quite frankly fucking disgusting. And it's just reveals like how utterly fucking hollow and utterly parasitic capitalist culture is, and what it does to actual working class culture, which is it takes something like the football teams, hollows them out, turns them into a giant global brand, and then excludes the working class people who made it what it is. So like now, like most of these the big football teams, not just Man City and Man United, but all of the top division clubs, like they have nothing to do with like the working class communities that from whence they came. Nothing. They might as well be based in the UAE and Singapore. In fact, that might be the next move. They might as well just play the entire year doing exhibition matches out there that actually make them more money. So this is a scam. It is a lie. This is what capitalism does to every form of working class culture in the end. It takes it, empties it of all its radical and working class content, keeps him forms a simulacrum of it, and then sells it to lawyers and bankers and property speculators so they can feel a bit edgy at the weekend. That's what Andy Burnham represents. That, and of course, we go beyond that, and he also he's the chosen man to revive the Labour Party on behalf of the British ruling class. There is that as well. So this is the Andy Burnham premiership. This is what has been promised. This is what he will do. Do you enjoy it yet? Didn't think so. Because if you go through Manchester, take a look at it, or go through any British city, you'll see the same thing going on. Burnham has invented nothing new. All he has done is speed up the processes that were already there. Financialization, speculation, the social cleansing of the working class, and he's called it a great progressive triumph. And the trade union leaders, of course, fucking agree with him. What a surprise. Right, okay, so just a quick comment from Almir here. I'll just put that, just have a look at that. Look at the ticket prices for the World Cup between $1,500 and $3,500 US at the moment. Working class completely excluded. Yeah, but I was like, who can actually afford to go? If you're like, if you're supporting like Scotland or England, who can actually afford to take time out to go over to like the United States and go to the games, paying that amount, and also paying the airfares and stuff like that? Who can actually afford to do that? Almost nobody. Without going into like massive amounts of debt. Like, this is the thing. Like, this football is a very working class game, and it has been like completely colonized by these horrendous corporate scumbags and the scumbag, detestable petty bourgeoisie, who are the ones who go now. Why do you think the atmosphere is so dead in a lot of like Premier League stadiums? It's because the actual working class are excluded. The actual what happened, as I've talked about before, in England especially, but I think this is true elsewhere. But I think in England it is especially true. They used like the crowd violence and the tragedies of the 80s, which were caused largely by like football club owners refusing to invest in new stadiums and the police using like brutish tactics against working class fans. They used the scandal from that to basically cleanse the working class from the game at the top level. That's what they did. So, if I wanted to go to a football game these days, when my daughter's older, if she wants to go, I certainly wouldn't be taking her to fucking Celtic or Rangers, in Glasgow. Probably like I have to go to I would go to like Partick Thistle or like Clydebank or something, some lower division club where like working class people can still get in. because like all it is at the moment in England and Scotland, same is true in the other European countries. It's not a working class game anymore. It's a game owned and controlled by the capitalist class, but which is provided for the entertainment of the petty bourgeoisie, new and old. Right. Okay. Sid says all of our popular American sports are unwatchable money-making shells of their former selves. All the working class fan bases have been pushed away. Alan says it's crazy that the whole working class can be excluded from an entire city, and they say that capitalism works. Well, it does work for certain people. I mean, the working class is allowed in to work, but of course, then you can't afford to do anything in the city itself. And like this is like it's interesting to reflect like on culture, especially because the so much culture is generated by the working class, but then of course it's packaged and sold by gigantic corporations, and it's sold to the people with disposable incomes, which is the bourgeoisie and the petty bourgeoisie. And so this is why it is progressively blandified, because the raucous and rebellious music that comes from the working class, whether it's blues, whether it's punk, whether it's hip hop, whether it's or dance music, like all of the elements within that could be offensive to the ears of the horribly bland taste of like the English middle class, who are some of the most fucking boring twats that I have ever had the displeasure to meet. People whose idea of like a fine musical evening out is going to a Coldplay gig or something, which is enough to make you want to fucking eat glass. It's sold to them, people with the most bland taste in the universe. That's who the market is, which is why everything's so shit. Part of the reason why everything's so shit. The other reason is like an economy based on pure parasitism doesn't deliver a lot of inspiration to people. It demoralizes and alienates people, which in itself isn't a good place for creating great art. Right. Okay, I'm just going to go through the chat and say hello. So, hello to Speedy, hello to Arnold, hello to Akhmadovich over there in Moscow, hello to Jerry, James Graham, Walter, Andy from Oz, Pat from Bristol. We got Manuag 3886. We have Moving Targets. We have David King. We have Robeson. We have North Will Rise Again. We have Svetlana in Moscow. We have Peep Show. We have Spiral Alice. We have Zhukov's Boots down there in Brum. We have Steve. We have Sid Hatfield. We have Almir in the Once and Future Socialist Yugoslavia. We have Ben Horst. We have Alex Moore from Fife. We have who else we got here? We had a fascist who I've binned, which is the only correct response to any fascist idiot. Sid says, we're the customers, but as our level of well-being has devolved, we've become much less viable customer base. Team owners probably started to realize this in the 1980s. Is it true that the aristocracy owns a third of the land in Britain? Why is land reform not a huge political issue? Good question, Alan. It was in Scotland for a while. Like 20 years ago, the Scottish National Party actually ran on the idea that they were going to reform land ownership in Scotland. But of course, surprise, surprise, they did a study of it and they never went anywhere with it, because most land in Britain, I mean, there is a considerable amount used for farming. It's owned by basically three groups. It's owned by the aristocracy, the monarchy, the church, and then of course a lot of it is owned by like agribusiness, or the agribusiness operates the land on behalf of the aristocracy. So yeah, it should be a huge issue, but the reason why I think it's not, first of all, is because the ruling class have very deliberately done their best to obscure it as an issue, and also they have used their position in the world market to try and secure cheaper and cheaper sources of food. So like only I think it's around about just over half of the food that is sold in Britain in the supermarkets actually comes from Britain. A lot of it, almost half of it, is bought in, and certainly like the cheaper end stuff is bought in. So, and also like there are like issues around land ownership, but the that's mainly taken up by like the ever diminishing base of small farmers, who are again like not a particularly powerful constituency. They had a go a few years ago with saying that we grow the food. Why are you hitting us with this inheritance tax stuff? And it got a lot of attention, but they don't really have the power to actually move stuff. So like unlike in like the Netherlands or France or Germany, there isn't like a significant base of like small to medium farmers in this country. There's some, but not generally very many. So like the demand for like land reform would be more urgent if there had to be more food grown in this country, and like the horrific inefficiency and parasitism of the agricultural system got exposed more. That would make it more of an issue. So yeah, in Scotland it certainly is an issue because there's huge areas of like Scottish land which just aren't used for agriculture. They're used for like the leisure pursuits of the idle rich, like deer stalking or fox hunting or something. Maybe not fox hunting these days, but like deer stalking is a big thing. Grouse shooting is a huge thing. So like a lot of it is used for that. A lot of it is just kept idle. So like there's huge agricultural potential in Britain. Actually, the mix of seasons that we get would enable us to actually grow a lot of food or rear a lot of animals, but it's just not profitable enough to do so. And the ruling class wants to keep food prices down, so they spend a lot of time and effort getting food from overseas and bringing it in. Food from hyper exploited sources of labor. That's the reason why. I mean, there is a lot more to it. I mean, land reform should also be an issue in the United States, given that the advanced monopolization that's going on there as well. Right. Okay. So let's go to the next item on our agenda, which is the phony working class potentials of a certain Mr. Graham Platner. Now, I wasn't going to cover this until like I saw like the quite frankly disgraceful way which the American left is carrying on, as if this guy was like, he just come off his fishing boat, jumped out of it, and came to challenge that goddamn Susan Collins and take that Senate seat on behalf of the American worker. Like, the problem is though that none of this is true. Yes, he's running for Senate, but this guy, in actual fact, is not what the American left has presented him as. So he's been presented by his media defenders as like some kind of impoverished enlisted man in the army. So he's running for Senate up in Maine. Now, Maine residents who are watching might dispute this, what I'm about to say, but Maine's one of the wealthier places in the United States. There are some places in it that I'm sure are very poor, but if you ranked it next to all the other states of the Union, and you ranked it next to all the other states in the Union, it wouldn't be one of the poorer states. There's some very poor states like Alabama and Mississippi, Missouri, and there's some very poor areas of states. Maine is one of the better off places. So the idea that he's this poverty-stricken ex-soldier who's sticking it to the man, all of this is a confection pulled together by Platner himself, but also his defenders. Now, his defenders speak of him as if he were some, poverty-stricken mechanic from the Rust Belt, driven by economic necessity into signing up for the Iraq War. but nothing could be further from the truth. Platner's grandfather was a certain Warren Platner, the celebrated modernist architect whose designs define the interiors of the Ford Foundation building and the original windows on the World Restaurant that used to be at the top of the now, of course, long gone World Trade Center. His father, Bronson Platner, is an Ivy League educated attorney who has donated more than $65,000 to federal Democratic candidates since 2011. His mother, Leslie Harlow, is a successful entrepreneur and restaurateur who owns the Ironbound Restaurant and Inn, a quote casual fine dining restaurant and old world luxury hotel. So Platner did not enlist in the United States Army to escape poverty. He briefly attended the elite Hotchkiss School in Connecticut, where annual tuition now exceeds $60,000 a year, before transferring to a prep school in Bangor. He enlisted in 2004 at the age of 19, not because his local factory had closed, but as he told the New Republic in an interview, he was motivated by, quote, noble motives and partly by boyish naivete, and because he, quote, wanted to play soldier, unquote. He added with a candor he has since learned to suppress, quote, I might have read too much Hemingway, unquote. So this isn't the biography of a working class youth conscripted by economic coercion. It is the biography of a wealthy young man who treated imperial warfare as an adventure sport. Now, most American veterans serve one or two tours. Some do more. Most it seems to be one or two. Many do return traumatized, sickened by what they witnessed, and horrified about their complicity in the crimes that were committed against the people of Iraq and Afghanistan and many other places. Platner is not one of those men. He served 3 combat tours in Iraq as a Marine infantryman, including in Ramadi and Fallujah, key sites of American war crimes, then enrolled at George Washington University, and then promptly re-enlisted in the Maryland Army National Guard for a 4th tour in Afghanistan. He later returned to Kabul as a State Department security contractor in 2018 and was, of course, a member of the notorious Blackwater mercenary outfit. So why did he return repeatedly to Iraq and Afghanistan? Now, in a recovered Reddit post from 2015, Platner was a bit more candid than he is now. Iraq, he wrote, was the most enjoyable experience of my life. That's a direct quote. Combat was, he says, incredibly exciting. Wartime was, as he said in 2015, one hell of an awesome experience. This is a war that killed 1 million Iraqis, by the way. That he would, quote, do it again in a heartbeat, unquote. He acknowledged, quote, I was never a huge fan of killing, at least not for killing's sake, but I did love winning, and that required killing. So he did love killing that. So this isn't the voice of some reluctant worker forced into the army due to lack of other options. It's the voice of a rich boy war tourist who discovered that he got a thrill from brutalizing and killing Iraqis and Afghans. So that's the great hope of the American left, apparently. Come to the American left and their true role in just a moment. Now, his current campaign leans heavily on his identity as an oyster family, an oyster farmer, so to speak. A soul of the earth, working class guy casting his nets off the Maine coast. The reality is, of course, much more prosaic. He took over the Waukee Neck Oyster Company in 2019, a small operation on a private island in Frenchman Bay, owned by his family's business partners. And now his financial disclosures list his mother's restaurant as the farm's only customer. He does not collect a salary from this enterprise. His income derives primarily from approximately $4,800 per month in disabled veterans benefits and a $200,000 loan from his father to purchase a home. A commercial fisherman in Maine, speaking anonymously, described the operation as, quote, more of a boutique operation closer to a hobby farm. And so this man is not some like salt battered fisherman. He's a rich kid reliant on his father's money. So this is rich man's cosplay. It's not a business even. It's a prop in his story. Now here we get to him posturing as some kind of anti-war candidate. Now he's moved away rhetorically from his 2015 Reddit posts to become, on the surface, a critic of American wars. He has called, at some points, US military adventurism, quote, a mechanism of moving taxpayer dollars into the private bank accounts of defense companies all on the backs of working class men and women. He acknowledges that, quote, the violence I took part in effectively had no purpose. Well, it did have a purpose. That sort of pacifist language obscures more than it reveals. But there's a curious exception to this criticism of American militarism. When it comes to the war in Ukraine, he is no longer uh, anti-war. In fact, he's very pro-war. In a 2025 interview given in December of that year with the New Yorker, he advocated for supplying military aid to Ukraine, stated plainly, I personally think we should provide them with support. And in a June 2026 interview with Sebastian Junger, Platner was even more explicit. He said, the Ukrainians are resisting an armed invasion and I absolutely support them. Maybe that's why. Maybe he feels some kind of kinship with men who have similar tattoos to him that serve in the Azov battalion. Now, he attempted to square this circle by noting that US support for Ukraine is complicated by simultaneously support for the Saudi regime and the Israelis in Lebanon right now, a rhetorical maneuver that allows him to sound critical while affirming the fundamental policy. He is, he says, an internationalist, not an isolationist. He wants the United States to invest in international institutions, not to dismantle the empire, but to manage it in different ways. Platner has called the Gaza genocide the ultimate moral test of our time. That's a direct quote. And he has criticized AIPAC. When the empire turns its guns on a target that enjoys the approval of the Democratic Party's foreign policy establishment, he dutifully falls into line. This is the Platner method in miniature. Adopt a language of the left to legitimize the substance of liberal imperialism. He will condemn the wars he personally fought in once they are politically safe to attack. He will call the Gaza genocide a moral test. When the empire turns its guns on a target that enjoys the approval of the most powerful sections of the American ruling class, Graham Platner salutes and says, yes, sir. So this is a man who is a rich kid. He signed up to fight in a war, not because of necessity, but because he thought it was an adventure. He has admitted that he enjoyed killing and brutalizing Iraqis and Afghans. He has never really stepped away from that, despite his rhetorical readjustments. And presumably he still thinks he would do it all again. This isn't just a man who was an ordinary soldier. This man joined Blackwater, a fascist militia, basically, that is run by a prominent American fascist in the form of Eric Prince, or was for a long time. He's now rebranded a few times. So that this man is held up as some kind of leftist icon just tells you all you need to know about the wretched state of the American left. Like the issue isn't that he was in the US Army. The issue isn't even that he's actually a rich guy or a guy from a rich family. The issue is that his actual politics are dreadful. His actual politics involve supporting the oligarchic fascistic junta in Kiev that has ransacked Ukraine and sacrificed hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians to their deaths in a war that was organized, inspired, armed, and sustained by US imperialism. And he's all on board with that. So this guy is a complete fake, a complete fraud. Now, when it comes to recruitment into a revolutionary party, this is an interesting question. Should you take combat veterans, even those who have served in notorious criminal organizations such as Blackwater? Well, yes, absolutely you should. Absolutely you should. On the ground, but this is the crucial difference. If they're actually have genuinely turned against their past, if they're prepared to actually offer a consistent critique of it, if they're prepared to engage in political education, to actually put themselves at the service of the American proletariat and against the warmongering of the American ruling class. None of that applies to Platner. He's just a standard Democrat who occasionally spouts New Deal rhetoric and hides behind his endorsements of the DSA by the DSA and others to blunt any criticism of him from the left. He's in the endorsement of him, uncritical endorsements by the luminaries of the American left, only tell us how absolutely bankrupt these people are and how they are prepared to take literally anybody who's prepared to utter some left phrases, and how when it comes to the most dangerous war of our time, a war that is in many ways even more dangerous and even more bloody than what is going on in West Asia right now, the American left's all on board for continuing it and ramping it up even further. Graham Platner is, in fact, the absolutely ideal specimen for them. Right. So I will just going to do one more story before calling it quits for tonight, and that is a final comment on the push for militarism in Britain, which is of course a consistent thing. Andy Burnham has of course joined in on this as well. Now, the point about British militarism is covered more comprehensively in a video I made last week, explaining why British remilitarisation is such a joke and will most probably not happen. Certainly not in the way that the foaming lunatics of the Daily Telegraph think that it's going to. But the push for it comes from all these like former military officers, from clowns like Paul Mason, etc. And it occurred to me that like until we are actually prepared to, on a mass basis, agitate properly against this, then this is going to keep basically kicking us in the nuts, so to speak. Because what the military men and the intelligence men are all demanding is more money for our beloved armed forces. And of course, a lot of these guys like Lord Danner, Admiral Lord West, etc., are all heavily invested in American defense companies. That's where their big stock portfolios lie. So a lot of this is a farce. It's just a share maximization scheme, shall we say. But the crux of all their arguments is, and this was true of like Lord West the other day when he's babbling on about, it's all very well having breakfast. What if the breakfast gets shot out of your hands by a Chechen stormtrooper? And they keep putting forward this idea, which is like completely ridiculous, that there is like some kind of like imminent Russian invasion of not just Eastern Europe, but also all of Europe and also Britain, which is transparently ridiculous. And it was ridiculous. Well, it was slightly less ridiculous when, as I've said before, when the Soviet Union existed and the Warsaw Pact existed. I mean, that was a series of nations and a military alliance with a phenomenally huge military industrial base and gigantic armies that could have kicked the hell out of NATO 50 years ago. But that's not where we are now. The Russia of today is run by an ultra-cautious Bonapartist group who are desperate not to disrupt business as usual too much for the Russian oligarchy, which is the reason why the war has dragged on so long, or one of the key reasons anyway. So what, that group is going to do what? March all the way to Britain? Do a vast parachutist landing in London? What, they're going to be like the Chechens are going to sail up the Thames in an amphibious assault craft, jump out and take over Canary Wharf? This doesn't make any fucking sense. And even the people saying it must know it doesn't make any sense. There's no motivation for the Russians to do any of these things, nor do they actually have the capacity to do it. Not really. They have the capacity to defend themselves. Their actual defense doctrine is very cautious and based on defense of their own territory. It's not based on aggressive expansionism. Neither was the Soviet Union's before it, but at least the Soviet Union could be made to look as if it was threatening. But there was no, for instance, Soviet plan for an aggressive invasion of the west of Europe. There is no Russian plan to do that. It's nonsense. Just as like there was, as John Helmer has pointed out in a piece recently, there was no like Soviet submarine threat to Sweden back in the day. There is no Russian threat to Finland. There's the Russians aren't about to relaunch the Winter War. It's all a confection pushed by cynical militarists in all of the European states, pushed by the British and American ruling classes, the French and Germans being in the mix as well, because they want to just keep the war in Ukraine going no matter what. And in the case of Britain, it's also about a desperate attempt to use this Russian threat to create a new, shall we say, a new narrative in the country. The ruling class have been desperately searching for a new mega threat behind which they can hide all of their own sins. They tried it with like Al Qaeda and the war on terror, and that didn't really work. No one was really convinced that Osama bin Laden was going to pop up in central London, run the caliphate's flag up Nelson's column and start beheading people. Well, maybe some of the Stephen Yaxley Lennon fans believed that. Nobody with a brain did. But the Russian thing, they're desperately trying to turn like Putin era Russia into some sort of version of the Tsardom mixed with Stalin era Soviet Union as some like perma mega threat that justifies all the things that they want to do, including like throwing more money into the never ending black hole of the defense budget. And it's worth re-emphasizing here. The Ministry of Defense is one of the most horrendously inefficient and totally corrupt departments in the entire British government. And that takes some doing. Money just disappears out of it. And you see Starmer going on in his robotic voice, like, building more industrial capacity, more native defence capacity. And what does it actually say in his defence improvement plan, in his strategic defence review? Spend more money on nuclear weapons. Where do the nuclear weapons come from? The nuclear weapons, in the form of the Trident system, comes from the United States. They're a United States design. Where does a lot of the equipment for the submarines that they're going to launch these things come from? Where does the hardware and the software ultimately derive from? Derives from the United States. What else are they spending money on? Well, it's the F-35 jet. Where does that come from? Well, it comes from the United States. Who controls the software for it? It remains in the control of the United States. So, and unless you plug these aircraft into for like software upgrades every month or so, then they become useless. And the United States retains apparently kill switches on a lot of these equipment. Now, there used to be a native British aircraft industry, but the British ruling class just allowed it to wither away and die. So now they just buy it all in from the United States. So, and when it comes to their actual plans for expansion of the military, what they're talking about is more drones, more F-35s, more air defense systems, and like they keep talking about a society-wide effort, and reindustrialization. But again, like there's a huge talk, and the actual investment level is just too low, because like the private sector doesn't want to do that. The private sector that deals with military matters in this country is a series of monopolists who are making quite enough money, a good profit as it is, off the rather sort of boutique artisan system they've got at the moment. The kind of like mass production system that the Russians do have as part of the sort of Soviet industrial legacy. Britain and the United States aren't going to produce that. Britain's certainly not going to produce that. So what's the actual aim here? The actual aim, first of all, is a cynical exercise in money making. There is that. But the broader aim is to make sure that they can keep the war against Russia going one way or the other by sacrificing the entire Ukrainian male and probably female population, but also instilling a sense of militarism and fear to create the simulation of a wartime environment inside Britain itself. That's what they're actually aiming to do. They don't actually want to fight the Russians. I mean, there is the old, there is a comparison to be made to the old argument by like Jean Baudrillard, the old French philosopher, who wrote a controversial essay in 1991, I believe it was, no, 1990, about the Gulf War, called "The Gulf War Never Happened" or "Gulf War Will Not Happen." Now that got misinterpreted by a lot of rather foolish people, but the basis of his argument came down to the fact that, like, the Gulf War for Western audiences was a war that was not happening to them. It was a war that existed entirely on television. Now this has been the way for all of the Western wars since the end of the Soviet period. The great majority of people in the West do not serve in the military and will never serve in the military. So the number of people who actually experience war directly is like less than 1% of the population. But the population watches the wars through television and online. They experience it as essentially a media product, which is what Baudrillard's point was over 35 years ago. Now it's even more true. So the war with Russia, there is a real side to it, a very real and deadly side to it, and it's in Ukraine. But again, less than 0.1% of the British population will experience that. Most of them have no understanding about it. Most of them just know it's a war going on done by bad Russians over there, and there's a lot of Ukrainian refugees that turned up a while ago. The point that the British government's policy is, in my view, a very cynical attempt to create to quote Baudrillard, would be a simulacrum of a wartime environment. They have no intention of actually going and fighting the Russians themselves. Because if you launch the British Expeditionary Force over to, beach their, inflatable dinghies on a beach near Odessa, they'll all be wiped out pretty quickly. If it came to that, they know that. That's why they're not going to do it. What they're going to do is try and do this society militarization as a simulation, as a way of propagandizing, especially working class youth, into buying back into a system which is delivering them shitter jobs on lower wages, with public services which get stripped away, where everything's expensive, where your pay packet disappears as soon as it comes into your bank account. And that system needs a form of legitimation for it to survive. And the only one that they can think of right now is, we are protecting you against the dire Russian threat. Just don't examine it too closely, because it doesn't actually exist. And so until we can actually answer this nonsense, not just from Labour, not just from the Tories, but also from Farage and Reform, from the Liberal Democrats, from the Greens, who also buy into this, and also from the fucking Scottish and Welsh nationalists, who also buy into this. Yesterday, in the British Parliament, the leader of the SNP in Westminster, an idiot by the name of David Dugan, attacked Keir Starmer from the right, claiming that his defence improvement plan did not go far enough. Now, what kind of a Scottish nationalist is this guy, Dugan? And what kind of nationalists are there in the SNP, whose former leader, Alex Salmond, once described the British Army as an occupying army? But now, a party that supposedly wants Scotland to be independent is calling for the British Prime Minister to spend more on a British army and expand it to be more capable of fighting wars. An army which used to be referred to by SNP leaders as an occupying army. That doesn't sound like they particularly want any kind of independence, does it? And the same is true in Wales. The Welsh nationalists, supposed Welsh nationalists, are all in on the NATO war on Russia. So what kind of nationalists are these? What kind of independence would SNP or Plaid Cymru actually deliver if they got it? Which they won't, because they're completely incapable of actually fighting for it. It would be countries that would be crowbarred into the EU and into NATO. So no control over the economy, no control over defence. You surrender control of that back to London, Washington, Paris, and Berlin. So what was the point? To change the flag? What was the point of any of this? You can spot the frauds a mile away. To go back to the Graham Platner thing, you can spot that Graham Platner's a fraud because he refuses and will not ever counter the American bullshit about the Russian threat. You can tell that the Labour left, the Greens, the SNP, Plaid Cymru, and by the way, if we're talking both in the occupied 6 counties of Ireland and the south of Ireland, the Republic, if we're talking about them, also Sinn Féin, you can tell they're full of shit because they're all for the war in Russia. They're, in reality, all for NATO. So if they're all for that, then that's what counts. Because so Sinn Féin, let's talk about them for a second. We'll be I'm going to do a program specifically on the Irish neutrality question in the next few days. Sinn Féin want a united Ireland. I want there to be a united Ireland. I think most of you watching this channel will agree with that. What value does a united Ireland have if it's a united Ireland that's in NATO? That's essentially, again, a battle space controlled by Britain, the United States, and to a certain lesser extent, the European countries. Well, what value does that have? Why you might end up with the same British troops who are still garrisoned in the north of Ireland staying there, but now they're a NATO detachment. What was the point then? When did it become the case that like Irish nationalism basically just became like the sort of parody the parody of itself that James Connolly warned about, which is that you could fly the green flag above Dublin tomorrow, but the British will still own you. Well, you get rid of the formal British rule from the north of Ireland, unite Ireland, and then go into NATO. What was the point of that? What was the point of any of that? So this brings us to the concluding part of this, which is again, unless you are prepared to actually do the serious business of debunking the nonsense and the drivel talks by these people, these absolute clowns and stooges and sellouts, like Graham Platner, like the Labour Party, like the Greens, like the SNP, the Welsh nationalists, etc., Sinn Féin, unless you're actually prepared to counter this sort of pro-NATO, pro-war nonsense that you get from these people, then you're not doing jack shit that's worthwhile. Because this is the thing they're using to justify ever greater domestic authoritarianism, ever greater attacks on like what few democratic rights are left, and ever greater cuts to things that actually benefit the working class, and more money spent on the deeply corrupt military-industrial complex. So unless somebody's prepared to actually counter that, then they're absolutely full of shit and should be disregarded. Right then. Just going to go through some comments here. Peter Carmichael says, there is no working class. None of my neighbours work. Well, it's quite clear. I mean, I live on an estate in Glasgow and all of my neighbours work. I mean, there are areas which are like completely workless, or like where there's huge undeclared unemployment, where there's massive underemployment. That's certainly true. But to say that there is no working class, Peter, that's going way over the top. Let's just see who else has got here. Right, just going through. Sea of Kronos says Garda chief appointed by London. Yeah, that's often the case. President Jesus says, will Alex do a review of Citizen Vigilante, perhaps on Death Wish as well? Yeah, I've heard about this. That would require me sitting through it. Maybe. There are some things that I'm going to review. I mean, I've long promised a review of the Alex Garland bizarreness called Civil War. Might do that tomorrow, actually. So yeah, I'm going to do that. If you've got review suggestions, you're on the Telegram page, then drop them into the forums on there that deal with like culture as suggestions, or email me, one of the two. Non Zensi says, does Ireland have a Marxist-Leninist party that international solidarity reach out for you? Mentioning and support would help to build. Well, there are various people who do defend the concept of Irish neutrality. There are various different organisations and parties that do that. Not sure if there's like a single Marxist-Leninist party in Ireland that does that. There's various different Marxist or Marxish organisations that are broadly committed to like the maintenance of Irish neutrality, but I'll come to that when we do the specific programme on it. Okay, right. Got a good number of you tuning in tonight, so thank you all for doing so. So yes, we're going to be back again tomorrow. I might do the Civil War review tomorrow. I mean, I know it's a year late, but if there's interest, I'll be doing that. I will probably do the Irish Neutrality show on Saturday, and then we're doing the World Cup special here on Sunday. So more stuff coming up. Next week, we have the beginning on Patreon of our reading group course on Marxist state theory, starting, of course, with Lenin's seminal State and Revolution. So go over to Patreon and sign up there if you want to be included on that. We also have, starting very soon, the great adventure that will be the reading through the complete works of Marx on economics. So a 7-volume read there that will probably take place over the course of well over a year. So join us on Patreon if you want to get in on that action. Thanks to everybody who supports the show on Patreon. Be sure to go and check out the video on Lebanon that is on the YouTube page at the moment. That was a failed live stream from the other day that is now available as a video, soon to be uploaded to Patreon as audio as well. Right. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in tonight. I'll be back with you again tomorrow. But until then, here's your normal video outro, and I will say good night to you all.
Небо утреннего стяг, в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, реют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы. Будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути.